Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. Sirius pulled the distraught woman into a hug, and she melted into his chest and sobbed silently. "You better come back to me, Sirius Black," she choked warningly. Sirius just pulled her closer to him and enjoyed the warmth and love he felt when she was in his arms. He had to be there to fight for the family he had only just gotten, and he didn't trust anyone other than Harry to do that. He didn't trust anyone else to watch Harry's back when he needed it most, and he certainly didn't trust anyone to watch his own back other than his godson. If he died, he knew that all those he loved would be cared for beyond necessity. If he died, then he would be dying fulfilling the oath he had given to his best friend, being there for his godson and protecting him at all costs. Something that Sirius felt that he had failed to do for most of the boy's life. Break. Albus Dumbledore was stroking his familiar's plumage, waiting for the Hogwarts staff to arrive for the meeting he had called. He didn't have to wait long as they began to file in wearing looks of concern and confusion. When they were seated, he looked upon his colleagues and smiled warmly at them. "Those of you in the Order are aware that Tuesday Lord Voldemort will be attacking Hogsmeade with the weight of his full force behind him," he began gravely. Those who were aware nodded worriedly, while those who were not wore looks of shock and fear. "If that is so, Albus, then should we not keep the children in the castle today?" Slughorn asked, eliciting many nods from several members of staff. "Alas, if that were possible, then I would be doing just that," Dumbledore answered the rotund man. "However, everything must appear to be normal. If we cancelled the trip, then Tom would certainly become suspicious and may change his tact, something we do not want to happen," he explained. "But fear not, the students are safe," he finished confidently. "How can you be sure?" Professor Sprout questioned with a frown. "Because myself, Mr. Potter and Mr. Black will all be in the village today," the old man responded, simply. "You put too much faith in the boy, Albus," Slughorn stated worriedly. "You should have the same faith in Harry that I do, Horace," Dumbledore implored. "All of our lives are in his hands. If he fails, then we lose," he finished seriously. Slughorn just shook his head. By all accounts of what he had heard and read, the boy was very gifted, but he just could not bring himself to willingly place his life in his hands. "I did call you here for a reason," Dumbledore began again. "As I will be in the village on Tuesday along with Minerva and Phileas, I must hand over control of the wards, so the school can be secured after we have left," he explained. "Who will take control, Albus?" Professor Sinistra asked. "It will fall to Pomona to ensure that the correct wards are erected when necessary, and I hope that Argus, you will secure every possible entrance in and out of the castle," he added to the caretaker, who nodded while stroking his cat. "Horace, I would like you to secure the Slytherin students within their common room. I will not take any chances of the fight spilling within these walls and amongst our students," he instructed the man firmly. "Of course," Slughorn agreed immediately. He was aware that there were a number of students that had close family with questionable loyalties. "In fact, I believe that it would be most safe to secure all of their students within their common rooms," Dumbledore added thoughtfully. "Just to be sure," he finished with a nod. The meeting concluded shortly afterwards, and Dumbledore found himself stroking the plumage of his phoenix. "Into battle we go again, my friend," he intoned sadly. Fawkes trilled mournfully at the declaration. "I know," Dumbledore sympathized, "but we have to be there for Harry. He will need us," he explained. "As much as I hate to admit it, but they will all need us," he finished sadly. Fawkes trilled again, causing his companion to smile gently. "Well, if we don't make it, Fawkes, I was very pleased to have you with me for a century of my life also," he said sincerely, his eyes twinkling madly once. Fawkes trilled once more and rubbed his head into the old man's hand, lovingly. Break. Harry and Daphne had just taken their seats at a table in the Three Broomsticks after having placed their orders at the bar with Madame Rosmerta. They had spent the day as they would spend most days in the village. They had shopped a little for various things, school supplies for Daphne and books and such for Harry. Daphne noticed immediately that Harry was distracted. This wasn't entirely unusual, but he was much more distracted than he would normally be. So, are you going to tell me what's on your mind? She asked him with a raised eyebrow. Harry was shaken from his thoughts by the girl's question, and he released a deep breath before he spoke. Tuesday, he sighed simply. Tuesday? She questioned confusedly. Tom is going to attack on Tuesday with his whole army, Harry explained after he quickly erected a privacy ward around the pair. Daphne closed her eyes, swallowed deeply, and simply nodded at the announcement. You seem to be taking it better than I thought you would, Harry remarked thoughtfully. What can I do? Daphne asked desperately, opening her eyes. Harry could see that they were already filled with unshed tears, so he took her hand and squeezed it gently in a futile attempt to comfort the girl. I knew this was inevitable and I thought I'd come to terms with it. She shrugged. But I haven't, she added quietly. I'm sorry, Harry tried weakly. What? For being yourself? The girl asked rhetorically. You don't have to apologize for that, she explained with a shake of her head. I knew this day was coming, Harry, she continued with a sigh of her own. I just didn't expect it to be so soon, she finished sadly. The two sat in silence for a moment, neither knowing what to say. I'm not ready to say goodbye to you yet, Daphne sobbed suddenly. You think that I'm going to die then, Harry stated flatly. Daphne shook her head firmly. I know you will do what it takes to make sure he does, though, even if it does cost you your life, she replied knowingly. Harry had nothing to say to that. She spoke the truth and they both knew it. You've said enough times that you aren't afraid to die, and I know that if it's necessary to end him, then that is exactly what you will do, the blonde pointed out. You're right, Harry admitted, but I think you're missing something, he added. What's that? Daphne questioned with a frown. I have something worth staying for now, Harry answered with a gentle smile. Daphne continued to frown and Harry sighed before he spoke again. The night I was kidnapped after the tournament, I was content to die. He began casually. I had nothing and no one worth sticking around for. I could have been back with my family where I always wanted to be, he explained. But things have changed since then, he added with a shake of his head. What's changed? Daphne asked quietly. Your Harry stated simply. I was ready to just let it all be over, but then you came along and changed that, he said, giving her hand another squeeze. I'm not ready for this to be over either, he continued, sincerely gesturing between the two. I don't want this to end when it's only just begun, he finished. You really mean that? Daphne asked emotionally. More than I can put into words, Harry answered, truthfully. I've completely fallen in love with you, he added quietly. I'm not ready to die yet. Daphne launched herself into his arms and held him tightly. She had waited for what felt like an eternity for him to say that to her, and nothing could feel as special as this moment, despite the difficulties that were coming. Then you better come back to me, Harry, she begged emotionally. I love you, she said simply. What would I do without you? She asked him desperately. Harry pulled her in tighter before he spoke. I will do everything I can to come back, he promised. I have something to fight for now, believe me. Tom has no idea what he has done. Harry ground out. He ruined my past, and I'll be damned if he's going to take my future away from me too. The two just spent time in each other's arms while they could. Neither spoke much for the rest of the day, but maintained some form of affectionate contact. Both were simply content with this. Words were simply not necessary. Rick, Narcissa Black, for she was a Black once again, had spent the past few months living a rather peaceful and stress-free life. She had taken the opportunity to reflect back on the last decade of her life and come to several realizations. The first thing she became aware of was how lonely she had truly been living with Lucius. Life in the house she now resided in had not been much different to how things were when she was living in Malfoy Manor. In fact, she saw more of Harry here than she saw of her former husband when they had been married. The young man would visit a couple of times a week to ensure that she was okay and had everything she needed, despite the fact she had elves to fetch any necessities for her. She had been very surprised by the attentiveness the teen had shown towards her. He was certainly taking his family responsibilities seriously, and he, much to her surprise, treated her with much more respect than she had expected. She had assumed that she would be little more than a prisoner under his care, but she quickly realized that she had been wrong. He did not expect her to simply remain in the home, and even encouraged her to spend time away from the house and enjoy the pleasant weather here. He had even given her a very useful book on glamour charms that she could use when she wished to leave the property to shop so that she would not be noticed by anyone. The fact that he gave her an allowance every week so that she could live a similar lifestyle that she had become accustomed to was another surprise for the blonde woman. She learnt a lot about the teen from being under his care, but the thing that stood out the most to her was how good of a person he truly was. She had absolutely no doubt that he was fearsome with a wand and that within a second he would kill her if she gave him a reason. But she also knew that he was one of the most caring and gentle people she had ever met. She was the mother of his former school rival and the ex-wife of a very prominent Death Eater, yet he treated her better than she had been treated before by anyone who was supposed to care for her. The only downside to this arrangement, as far as she could see, was that she missed her sister terribly and wished for nothing more than to have her with her. She knew that it wasn't possible, and she knew that Bella would soon be back in Azkaban, if Potter were to win the war. But other than the desire to have her sister with her where it was safe, life was finally being kind to the youngest black sister, and she certainly was not taking it for granted. Break. Alastair Moody looked at both Sirius and Harry calculatingly before allowing a sinister grin to form on his heavily scarred face. "I like it," he growled, pointing to the map of Hogsmeade they had laid on the table before them. "It's risky," Roberts cut in, uncertainly. "But I have to agree that it is the best strategy in this case," he concluded a little reluctantly. Harry breathed a sigh of relief and dragged his hand through his hair. "There is no way Tom will allow his people to risk being surrounded. It makes sense that he would surround the village," he pointed out. "He is not expecting us to be prepared for his attack, and keeping one large force in the center of the village will be much better for us. We are quite outnumbered, but this way we can work together and deal with any unexpected surprises he might throw at us," he finished confidently. The other three men nodded their agreement of the younger man's observations. "The Death Eaters like to fight in chaotic conditions," Sirius began. "If we take the chaos away from them, then they will have to fight strategically, something they don't do well at all. And if we fight the way we have trained, then they won't stand a chance," he explained. "Then we have our groups of 4, Roberts agreed with a nod, 2 strictly defending and 2 firing spells. "That will minimize our casualties," he observed, feeling much more comfortable with the plan. "Then let's go break the news," Moody suggested with another grin. The 4 men entered the training room to find the Auras already standing in their ranks, waiting to be addressed. "At ease, men," Moody commanded as they filed in. The Auras physically relaxed their stances, but the apprehension could be felt throughout the room. "Tomorrow we fight," Moody announced simply. "As long as you do what you've been taught and do as you're told, then we will win." "I have no doubt," he growled firmly. There was some uncomfortable shifting heard throughout the room at the news of the impending fight. "I am not a man easily impressed," Mood began again as he paced the breadth of the ranks, looking at individuals as he passed. "But you bastards have impressed me," he admitted sincerely. A few smiles could be seen amongst the men and women at the praise from their leader. "3 months ago you were a sorry shower of shit," he proclaimed. "Those days are behind us now," he continued. "You are a team, and a damn good one at that. There hasn't been a team of Auras like you in many decades," he praised. "Now let's prove it to those bastards that want to take our lives away, our families' lives away, and let's end these pricks once and for all," he finished passionately. "Yes, sir," the assembled Auras roared, causing the man to give them a genuine smile. "Head Aura Robards will explain the plan to you, but remember, more than anything else, to avoid the Dark Lord," he warned. "We all know for damn sure that there is only one man in this room capable of taking that shit down," he added with a look towards Harry, who just nodded darkly towards them. He, along with Sirius and Moody, made their way to the exit when they were stopped by the voice of Gawain Roberts. "Potter, Black," he called in a commanding tone, causing the pair to turn towards the man. "We thank you for your service. It has been an honor to have you with us these past few months," he said sincerely. "Orab," he commanded, The Auroras stood smartly to attention, awaiting further instructions from their leader. "Salute," he instructed simply. The gathered men and women along with Moody and Roberts held their wands in front of them and fired off an array of different-colored sparks in tribute to the two men that had trained them. Harry and Sirius mimicked their action in a show of respect. "It has been our honor to be here," Sirius said with a bow towards the Auras. "We got there," Harry cut in with a grin. "I have every bit of faith that we will be successful tomorrow," he added confidently. The three men exited the room and Moody immediately clapped the other two on their shoulders firmly. "You earned their respect," he explained. "It's not often that you see that salute. They trust you," he finished knowingly. Harry and Sirius both nodded humbly. The last few months had been difficult, but they knew that it had been worth it. Not only had they helped the Auras improve, they had both certainly become better wizards and fighters from the experience. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a few surprises to leave for Tom and his followers," Harry announced coyly. Sirius' eyes suddenly became alight with mischief and mirth. "Pranks?" he asked with more than a little hope in his voice. "More than pranks," Harry replied warningly, but was grinning nonetheless. "Please, you have to let me help," Sirius pleaded. "I haven't pranked anyone in years and this will make up for it," he said excitedly. Harry sighed and shook his head at his childlike godfather, but grinned again at the idea that formed in his head. "Okay," he agreed simply. "But there is one condition." Sirius's face fell and he frowned at his godson questioningly. "You have to come and visit the portrait of my grandparents. You've put it off for too long," Harry chided. Sirius was clearly torn between his need to take part in a prank and not wanting to be scolded by Charles and Doria. After a few moments, he nodded reluctantly. Clearly the man needed a little respite in the form of some kind of prank from the seriousness of the day and task ahead. "At least they can't curse me," he grumbled. Moody just shook his head at the two. "Anything we should be aware of?" he asked with a frown. Harry shook his head. "No, just a few things for Tom and his friends," he answered with a grin. "They won't be anywhere near us," he assured the man. Moody nodded. "Make sure you sleep well. A tired fighter is a useless fighter," he instructed firmly. The two men nodded their understanding before apparating away. Moody just grinned at the thought of the impending battle. "It's been too long," he growled to himself. Break. Hermione and Neville were making their way up the winding stone staircase that led to the owlery so they could send letters home. They entered the room to find a very pensive and worried-looking Daphne, who clearly had not heard the duo coming in. "Daphne?" Hermione called out, causing the girl to startle at the voice. "Oh, hello, Granger, Longbottom." The blonde greeted the pair distractedly. "What's wrong?" Neville asked with a frown. He was aware that the girl was not fazed easily, so whatever was bothering her must be quite significant. Daphne looked at them and sighed sadly. "I'm not ready," she said simply and swallowed deeply. "For what?" Hermione asked gently. Daphne looked at the two critically before she sighed again. "Tomorrow," she answered weakly. "I'm not ready to say goodbye to him," she reaffirmed. "To who?" Neville inquired, confusedly. "You don't know then," Daphne returned with a frown. Neville and Hermione looked at each other uncertainly. "You know who is attacking tomorrow. It will all be over," she explained in a choked whisper. Both of the Gryffindors were shocked by the information. "Are you sure?" Hermione asked urgently. "Harry told me he's going to fight him," Daphne replied worriedly. "Shit," Neville intoned. "I need to find Hannah," Hermione announced in a panic. "They will definitely lock the castle down," she added knowingly. "She'll be in the greenhouses," Neville said as he took the girl's arm and began leading her out of the tower. "What are you doing?" Daphne asked the two. "We've been preparing," Hermione answered sheepishly. "They'll need healers," she explained as she was pulled away by her classmate. Daphne shook her head at the retreating pair. Harry had made her promise that she wouldn't attempt to involve herself, and she had reluctantly agreed. She wouldn't break her promise to him, no matter how awful it felt just waiting around for whatever will happen to happen. Break. Hermione and Neville burst into the greenhouse where Hannah was working. "Tomorrow," Hermione said breathlessly. "They're attacking the village tomorrow," she added after catching her breath a little. "How do you know?" Hannah asked skeptically. Harry told Daphne. Neville explained, "That means we need to go now," Hermione said impatiently and began pulling the blonde out of the greenhouse. "How will we get out?" Hannah asked. "I know a way," Hermione answered. "I need to get my bag and cat. He will let us into the tunnel under the Whomping Willow," she explained. "It leads to the Shrieking Shack," she added when she saw the confused expressions of her companions. "The Shrieking Shack?" Hannah questioned fearfully. "It's not haunted," Hermione responded exasperatedly. "There's no time to explain. Meet me in the entrance hall in 20 minutes, she instructed as they entered the castle. "Us, you mean?" Neville cut in firmly. "Neville, you haven't done the healing training," Hermione replied, shaking her head. "No," Neville agreed, "but I have been practicing from the book Harry sent, and you two will need someone to watch your backs," he pointed out. "I didn't think of that," Hermione conceded, biting her lip worriedly. "Then it's settled. 20 minutes it is," he said with a grin. They separated to fetch what they needed for the unexpected day ahead of them, none knowing what it was they were getting themselves into. "Break? Are you really going to make me do this?" Sirius questioned Harry worriedly as they were stood at the door to the library. "Yep," Harry answered and pushed the man into the room, following him and sealing the door behind him to prevent his godfather from fleeing. He took Sirius by the arm and led him to where his grandparents' portrait was situated and placed him in front. Sirius glanced at the pair and hung his head in anticipation for the scolding of a lifetime. "So you finally came to visit us," Charles stated casually. "Yes, sir," Sirius replied and swallowed deeply. "Stand up straight, boy," the man in the portrait commanded. Sirius immediately postured and slowly looked at the man and was surprised to see him smiling. "You've grown into a fine young man, Sirius," Charles praised warmly. "You're not angry with me?" Sirius asked incredulously. "I have no right to be," Charles shrugged. "I too made mistakes that I always regretted. I'm sure you carry enough guilt without me adding to it," he observed. Sirius just nodded his agreement and swallowed again. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Charles asked the marauder and his grandson. "As ready as we ever will be," Harry answered, sharing a look with his godfather. "Good," Charles responded sincerely. "You two go and show those bastards why you shouldn't mess with the Potters and the Blacks," he instructed firmly. The duo nodded, and Sirius. Doria spoke up, causing the man to look towards his great-aunt. "Do come and see us when it's all over. We have a lot of catching up to do," she explained gently. Sirius nodded and gave the woman a smile. "I will," he promised. "And you had better bring that young lady to see us, Harry. We have waited long enough to meet her," Charles added to his grandson with a raised eyebrow. Harry nodded his agreement. "You will both be fine," Charles assured them. "Trust each other and look out for each other, then there will be nothing that can stop you," he said encouragingly. Harry and Sirius shared a smile and a nod. "Can we go prank now?" Sirius asked petulantly, causing Harry to frown. "Come on then," he sighed. "Let's get it over with." Sirius chuckled gleefully and rubbed his hands together in anticipation. "Oh, this will be fun," he mused aloud. Break. The morning of April 1st dawned, as any typical morning would. The sun rose, and the birds chirped their tuneful song. There was no indication that today would see the spilling of blood and the loss of life that came with glorious battle. Harry awoke from his slumber in a mood that could only be described as ready and willing. He neither felt excited nor scared or nervous. He was just ready. It felt as though his whole life had led to this day, an inevitable confrontation with the temptress that was fate, though Harry despised the idea of an already determined path laid about before him. He had known for almost 2 years that this fight was going to take place, and he was simply ready for it. He had done everything possible to prepare for it, and he would have no regrets regardless of the outcome. In some ways he was tired of life. The life he had been given, certainly, but he knew that he could change that today. It was in his own hands, and he wasn't about to forfeit his right to a peaceful existence without fighting with every fiber of his being. He had goals and aspirations to fulfill now, and a future that was worth living for, and as much as he wanted to be with his family once more, he knew that they would prefer much more for him to survive and live a full life. The other side, after all, was an eternal condemnation, and he would only be here for a mere blink of an eye. He got out of bed and glimpsed the pictures on his bedside table. He picked them up and smiled at the sight of his parents' and grandparents' happiness as they were gathered in the hospital room he had been born in. "For you," he whispered, and placed a kiss on each picture before placing them back where they belonged, and left his room. He showered and dressed in loose-fitted khaki combat trousers, a fitted black t-shirt and white trainers, his preferred attire for a fight. He decided to not wear body armor as it inhibited his movement, something he would not risk despite the added protection it offered. He had more than enough faith in his own ability that he felt comfortable without it. He apparated into the kitchen of Potter Manor to find a very subdued Maisie already preparing his breakfast. Though he didn't feel particularly hungry, he knew he had to eat. He would certainly be needing the energy today. Maisie served him the food with a sorrowful look towards the young man she had come to both respect and admire over the past many months, and Harry smiled gently at the creature. "Don't be sad, Maisie," he tried, rubbing the elf comfortingly on the shoulder. "If things end badly today, you will be cared for, I promise." "Maisie just wants Master Harry back in one piece," the elf said emotionally. "Maisie will miss her Master Harry," she added sadly. Harry pulled the elf into a hug. "Well, Maisie, I promise you will see me again, no matter what," Harry promised knowingly. "You are family after all," he added sincerely. The elf choked back a sob and held the teen closer to her. "Yous needs to be eating your breakfast, Master Harry," she instructed firmly. "Yous can't be beating bad wizards with an empty stomach," she finished knowingly. Harry simply chuckled at the little elf. He knew perfectly well that she had been through war before, and had cared for High Grandfather the same way she was now caring for him. "I guess it doesn't get easier the more you face it," he thought to himself. He was pulled from his musings by the arrival of his godfather, who was looking very grave indeed, the amusement from last night being long forgotten. Harry could see that serious meant business. He was dressed similarly to Harry, though he wore all black and had tied his long hair into a ponytail. "Ready?" the marauder asked. Harry nodded. "I've done everything I can think of," he responded. "Certainly." "Me too," Sirius confirmed. The two remained silent for a moment, just looking each other speculatively. "Promise me something," Sirius suddenly spoke up. "Anything," Harry answered genuinely. "Please be there for Marlene and Natalie if I don't make it," he pleaded. Harry shook his head disbelievingly. "You don't even have to ask, you know that," Harry replied with a soft smile. "I just had to make sure," Sirius explained, choking on his words a little. Harry pulled his godfather into a tight hug. "How about we don't let these bastards take anything else from us," he stated coldly. Sirius gave a watery chuckle. "How is it you can be so strong?" Sirius asked, shaking his head. "I've always had to be," Harry shrugged. "And right now I have to be more than ever," he explained. Sirius wiped his eyes and stood stiffly. "You're right. We need to be today if we want to get out of this alive," he agreed readily. "No holding back today and no hesitating. If in doubt, fire first, and we handle the rest later," Harry said with a decisive nod. Sirius just nodded, his expression darkening considerably. It was almost time to fight, and both men were as ready as they ever would be for the coming battle. Break. Marlene woke alone in the bed she shared with her husband and immediately felt herself overcome with fear. She knew that he had gone to Harry's to wait for the signal to indicate the attack had begun, yet she knew he had not been gone long, as warmth could still be felt from where he had been lying only moments ago. She sighed and looked towards his pillow to see a letter that the man had clearly written to her. She understood that a conversation before the inevitable would be unbearable for them both, and she found herself grateful they had the initiative to go, because she could not trust herself to allow him to. He waited for her to wake. She wiped away the tears that had begun to fall, picked up the parchment and began to read. "To my beautiful wife. I know this is not easy for you, but I have to do it for us all, for myself, for you and our daughter. I couldn't face the conversation we would undoubtedly have, so I put everything important I wanted to say in this letter. Please forgive me for my cowardice. I wouldn't be able to leave today if I had to look you in the eyes and then walk away. Remember that I love you more than life itself, and there is nothing that will change that. I only hope that today unfolds the way we want it to and that I will be back with you soon enough. If that is not to be, then I want you to know that there will be a day that we see each other again and I will be waiting for you and Natalie on the other side. Take care of our daughter. You have everything you will both ever need, and I will see you either soon or later once you have lived a life you deserve. I have no doubt that Harry will win today, but I cannot promise that I will make it. He will be there for you if you need anything. All my love and so much more. Your idiot husband, Sirius. Marlene choked back a sob as she finished the letter and pulled it to her chest in attempt to feel closer to the man. Come back to me, Sirius, she begged. Break. Albus Dumbledore stood in front of the assembled members of the Order of the Phoenix, looking as grave as any had ever seen him. I have been instructed by Alistair to tell you all to only defend the auras and shield them as best you can. He will not tolerate Death Eaters being stunned. They are aiming to kill, so do not get in their way, he explained seriously. What if we are willing to kill them? Bill Weasley asked with a frown. Then I am sure your efforts will be appreciated, Dumbledore answered. Bill nodded towards his father and brothers with the exception of Ron, who would be remaining in the castle. He felt a hand rest on his shoulder and turned to see Remus Lupin giving him a hard stare, followed by a resolute nod. You too? Bill asked uncertainly. The last two people I consider family are out there. I've lost everyone else, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure I don't lose anyone else. Remus explained firmly, the wolf within him making its presence known through the amber glow in the man's eyes. It looks like you are with us then, Fred intoned, pulling the werewolf into the huddle of redheads. An honorary Weasley for the day, George added with a grin. Welcome to the family, the twins chorused together, causing the man to grin. You're all insane, Doge cut in disbelievingly. Were your wife and daughter murdered by those bastards? Arthur asked the man coldly. No, so shut up, Doge. We will take what action we please and you can stuff it, he spat uncharacteristically. Elphias Doge remained silent. He could see the Weasley patriarch was on the edge, and he did not want to be the man to push him. How will we know when to go? Emmeline Vance questioned the headmaster. Alastair will send us the signal, Dumbledore answered. Then we wait. Charlie piped up and sunk into a nearby chair, waiting for the go-ahead from their leader. The rest of the group just nodded and followed suit. Break. Daphne entered the Great Hall along with her sister and Tracy to find that the day appeared to be as normal as ever, though she knew it wasn't, and that notion was made even more clear by the absence of the more prominent members of staff from the table. Those who were absent were clearly very tense and looking apprehensive. What's going on? Tracy asked, having been aware of Daphne's lack of attention for the past few days. She had at first put it down to the fact that the girl was lovesick, but noticing her stiffening posture as she entered the room made it very clear to the girl that something was certainly amiss. It's happening today? Daphne whispered, worriedly to her friend. Tracy's eyebrows rose significantly. Today? She hissed incredulously. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. I had to keep it as quiet as possible, the blonde explained. Tracy nodded her understanding. There were certainly a few people in the castle of questionable morals and character, this she knew for sure. The trio sat and began eating their breakfast, and it wasn't long after that Professor Sprout stood and addresses the room. The castle is under an indefinite lockdown, she announced. When breakfast is over, you will be confined to your common rooms for your own safety, she added. Anyone who refuses will be detained using necessary force, she finished, sternly. A lot of speculative chatter broke out within the room, with several people trying to guess what the reason could be for the lockdown, though it was obvious to most. But Neville and Hermione aren't here, Ron called out to the herbology professor worriedly. Hannah is missing too, Susan Bones broke in, clearly concerned about her friend. I'm guessing they somehow became aware of today's happenings, Madame Pomfrey whispered to Sprout, who swallowed deeply. Are you sure? She asked. The matron quietly. I've been teaching the girls, and I'm guessing Mr. Longbottom decided to be a foolish Gryffindor and tag along, Pomfrey replied, sure of her deductions. Are any other students missing? Sprout asked those in the hall. When none came forward, she sighed in relief. Hufflepuffs will follow me to the dormitory. Ravenclaw students will follow Professor Sinistra. Gryffindors will follow Professor Grubbly Plank, and Slytherin will follow Professor Slughorn, she explained firmly. And what if we want to fight? A seventh-year Ravenclaw asked, standing up to be recognized. My father is an Auror and will be out there. I want to be with him, he stated angrily. Your father is a trained Auror, Mr. Mitchell. It is his job and you are still a student, Sprout answered. We have been instructed to not allow anyone to leave, she explained further. Your mudblood father is history, Mitchell, Marcus Belby shouted from the Slytherin table gleefully. Moron, Glazy Beanie muttered. How stupid can you be to announce your allegiance right now, he added, shaking his head ruefully. The Ravenclaw boy chuckled darkly at the Slytherin, who frowned at him irritably. What's so funny? Belby asked confusedly. Well, if your father is fighting for you-know-who, then he is the one that is history, Mitchell answered. My father and the rest of the Aurors have been trained by Potter and Black, he finished with a smirk. An eruption of chatter began in the room again at that revelation. Liar, Belby snarled. Not at all, Mitchell shrugged. I'm sure you'll find out when they are using a mop to clean up your father's remains off of the pavement, he finished, taking his seat again. Belby visibly paled and made to run from the room, but was stopped as the doors slammed shut before he could leave. Sit down, Belby, Slughorn commanded. But my father, the teen whined. You were happy enough to mock another student for the same thing. Now sit down, you idiot boy, the potions master commanded angrily, drawing his wand. Belby eyed the wand warily and swallowed deeply before taking his seat. Has Harry and Sirius really been training the Aurors? Astoria asked her sister. Since January, Daphne replied. Blaise Zabini chuckled amusedly. Looks as though the Dark Lord has no idea what he's getting himself in for, he mused aloud with a smirk. Belby gave him a venomous glare, which Blaise returned equally. The room was suddenly filled with the sound of explosions sounding from the village in the distance. So it begins, Daphne said weakly. Tracy and Astoria both put a comforting arm around the girl, and Blaise sat vigilantly by them. The group was joined by a teary-eyed Natalie, who was quickly pulled into Daphne's arms by the older girl. All they could do was comfort each other for the time being and hope that those they loved and cared for came out on the other side, alive and as unharmed as possible. Break. Harry and Sirius had been waiting around for almost 2 hours, the desire to fight growing with each passing moment. To them the wait was worse than any fight could possibly be. They became restless and irritable because of the anticipation they felt so. Both chose to remain silent, lost in their own thoughts. Harry had been preparing by reminding him why he was fighting and what it was he was fighting for. Family, vengeance, freedom, peace, a future, Daphne, he repeated to himself over and over again. His eyes had been glowing dangerously for some time, as his magic readied itself to be used liberally. He could feel it thrumming through his blood, itching to be used, itching to cut down those that were threatening everything he held in his heart. He began pacing, becoming more and more furious at the thoughts of his parents being murdered, watching Cedric be murdered right in front of him and being useless in that moment. He thought of all the problems Tom had caused him and the life he had been condemned to because of him. He thought of the childhood he had and the one he should have. He pondered what Tom would do to those who refused under his regime, but most of all he thought of what Tom would do to Daphne if he were to lose. His eyes became alight with a new fire and his magic positively pounded throughout him, and he growled angrily. He was both furious and excited at the prospect of both revenge and preventing any further pain. He simply could not wait to kill Tom Riddle, and he would damn well enjoy it. He would allow no man to threaten his life or those that were making it worth living. People, and Tom in particular, had taken liberties with the young man for too long, and something had finally snapped within him as he recollected every last injustice that had befallen him throughout his life. Sirius looked towards his godson after he heard him growl and felt a trickle of fear make its way down his spine as he saw the expression the younger man wore and the eerie glow of his eyes that became more apparent and began pulsing brighter and brighter. He was about to place a hand on Harry's shoulder in an attempt to calm him when they were intruded upon by a Patronus in the form of a coyote. "Now," the voice of Moody roared. The two men locked eyes and Harry vanished instantly. Sirius couldn't miss the look of pain and anger his godson wore. He simply looked deranged. He followed the teen only a split second later and appeared in the middle of the village by Harry's side, as planned. The moment he landed, Harry sent off a barrage of blasting and explosion curses, tearing large chunks of stone from the surrounding buildings and sending several Death Eaters fleeing from the onslaught of the debris that flew towards them. Sirius stood shoulder to shoulder with his godson and began firing the most devastating spells in his arsenal at the cloaked men, killing several of them in quick succession. The two worked in perfect harmony and synchronicity as they had trained, completely unaware of their allies behind them who were fighting for everything they were worth. It was them and only them, Sirius and Harry against the world, just the way it should always have been. Many paused to watch the duo for a few seconds and were completely blown away by the devastation the two wands caused in the hands of the two men. If battle and war could be considered beautiful, then what they created was a live and ongoing masterpiece of death and destruction for those that stood behind the wands of the artists. For those that stood in front of them, it was simply hell on earth. There was no beauty or grim artistic appreciation, only fear and pain could be experienced from this perspective. The pair quickly settled into their usual rhythm and defended each other when necessary and rained deadly spells down on their enemies with speed and precision, killing, maiming and destroying indiscriminately. Break. At Moody's signal, Dumbledore and the rest of the Order activated their portkeys and arrived amongst the contingency of Auroras. The headmaster immediately began conjuring heavy, thick slabs of granite in front of their ranks, his mastery of transfiguration being demonstrated by the speed and quality in which he produced the barriers. Remus and the Weasleys began forcing their way through the crowd to be at the forefront of the action. They heard the explosions and screams coming from their left and headed in that direction, making an educated guess that Harry and Sirius were the cause of the spells that were wreaking so much havoc amongst the Death Eaters. Bill began twirling his wand and muttering under his breath. "Anti-apparition wards?" he explained with a grin to his companions. "We don't want any of them escaping, do we?" he asked with a dark laugh. Remus spotted by Harry and Sirius ahead and made his way to them, simply bumping anyone aside who hindered his progress. The Weasleys followed the werewolf and soon found themselves in the thick of the action, where they could see Death Eater upon Death Eater being cut down ruthlessly by the duo. They added their own spells to the mix, cutting down their enemies without hesitation. "For my wife," Arthur growled, his eyes full of tears as he felled a cloaked figure with a cutting hex. "And for my daughter," he sobbed as he brought down another in a similar fashion. The men fought for all they were worth. If they were going to die today, then they would die knowing that they fought for what they believed in. Break. Hermione, Neville and Hannah were woken by the sound of loud explosions as they slept in the shrieking shack. The trio immediately jumped to their feet, confused and on edge. It took them a moment to remember why they were here. "We should have stayed in the castle," Hannah said simply as several screams of pain were heard from outside. "We have to help," Hermione responded, pulling her magically altered messenger bag onto her shoulder. Hannah swallowed deeply and nodded reluctantly. "Let's go then." Neville sighed as he drew his wand and opened the door. The two Gryffindors and the Hufflepuff left the shack cautiously and began scanning the area. They could see cloaked figures everywhere, but they were not paying attention to the three students. They were all focused on a large cluster of men in the center of the village, where hundreds of spells were impacting into the ranks of the Death Eaters that had them surrounded. "That way," Neville instructed, pointing towards a small gap. He moved forward carefully, closely followed by his companions. The reason for the gap in the circle of men soon became apparent. The ground was littered with the bodies of those that had failed to defend themselves. Dismembered limbs and various parts of the human anatomy were strewn about the ground as nothing more than offal that a butcher would discard after he had taken anything worthy from a carcass. Hannah doubled over and vomited at the gory sight and the smell of blood, urine and excrement that permeated the usually fresh and crisp air of the village. Neville patted the girl on the back and looked up to see a familiar young man firing off hexes towards somewhere on their left. "Harry," he whispered. Hermione and Hannah both looked towards where Neville was staring and blanched at the sight of the team. Harry was firing off spell after spell in quick succession into the hordes of Death Eaters, but that was not what caught them off guard. It was the sight of the teen that shocked them. The young man was covered from head to toe in blood, and they could tell by the way he was still moving and firing off spells that the blood wasn't his. He was simply terrifying, and his eyes were visibly glowing as he rained down destruction. He looked positively feral, and the expression on his face gave his former classmates chills. They watched in awe as the various jets of light erupted from his wand with power and precision. They were snapped from their awestruck state as they saw a cloaked figure charge towards the teen that was quickly rendered into nothing but a spatter of blood and sinew on the pavement. The body exploded into a mist of blood and guts as the green-eyed teen's spell hit true. Hannah proceeded to vomit again, and both Neville and Hermione paled considerably at what they had just seen. "We should have stayed in the castle," Neville echoed the blonde's previous sentiments. Before any reply could be given, a moan was heard from their right, and Hermione immediately headed towards the sound with her wand drawn. She didn't want to come across a Death Eater after all. Fortunately for the trio, it was an Auror, whose robes were soaked in blood from a deep wound in his back. The man groaned again and tried to move, but was stopped by Hermione as she sprung into action. Looking up and seeing the Hogwarts robes the girl was wearing, the Auror frowned. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he ground out. Hermione raised her eyebrow at the man. "Do you want my help?" she asked, indicating the bag of potions she carried. "What is that?" the Auror questioned confusedly. "Potions," Hermione answered simply as she opened the bag. "Hannah, can you start knitting the wound?" she asked. After a moment of hesitation, the Hufflepuff stepped forward, drawing her wand, and began the spell work on the man's injury. "Blood replenisher," Hermione mumbled, and she reached into her bag immediately and pulled out the vial of red liquid. "Pain potion," she muttered, and removed the potion and began administering them to the man. "That is quite a handy bag," the Auror observed through a grimace. "My wife is a healer and would love that," he added. "Told you," Hannah said triumphantly to the bushy-haired brunette. "Did you make it?" the man asked as he swallowed the potions given to him. Hermione just nodded shyly. "You must be damn clever," he praised as he winced in pain once again. "Done," Hannah proclaimed as she stepped back to admire her work. The Auror stood and stretched, noticing that the pain had subsided and he did not feel so nauseous and dizzy from the blood loss. "Not bad," he praised, surprised by the skill of teens. "But you should get the hell out of here. This is no place for kids," he advised firmly. Before she could respond, Hermione heard a bang louder than any she had heard before and felt herself being hurtled through the air. She felt herself impact onto the ground with a loud thud and felt pain shoot through her whole body. The pain overwhelmed her and she instantly felt very sick and dizzy. Within moments she knew no more as she lost consciousness, her last coherent thought being on the two friends that had accompanied her here. "Break?" The Dark Lord watched from the relative safety of the mountains north of the village as his followers began their attack. In a matter of seconds, all hell broke loose as the entire Auror force of the Ministry arrived, followed by several others including Dumbledore and his ilk. Even from this distance, the Dark Lord recognized the telltale silver hair and beard that his former Transfiguration professor adorned. He watched as his ranks were being decimated by the combined efforts of the Aurors and those that had accompanied them here. "They knew," he realized with a growl. "They must have found out," he whispered angrily, as he witnessed how organized his foes were. He shook with anger and was about to sound a command of withdrawal, but felt the presence of an anti-apparition ward being put in place. "Damn!" he roared as he pointed his wand at a boulder behind him, causing it to disintegrate into dust. "Lucius, Antonin, Alecto, Immachus," he called. "Lead the Inferi into the enemy ranks," he commanded. "Yes, my lord," the group replied in unison as they began herding the animated corpses towards their target. Voldemort knew that the bodies needed to be guided, or they would simply attack his own men as they made their journey. They were mindless after all, and had one trail of thought, and that was to maim and kill any living person they come into contact with. The Dark Lord watched as his followers led the 200 or so creatures into the fray, and smiled maliciously. "Jackson, Selwyn," he called to his final two companions. "Send in the Dementors and the rest of our friends," he instructed. "We need to see where the Petronoses come from," he explained. He wanted to know exactly where Potter was. He did not want to have to waste energy by fighting through the crowd as he sought the boy. He would need all the reserves he had. There would be no underestimating Harry Potter this time. But before he confronted the boy, he would overwhelm him and his allies with his superior numbers, tire him as much as possible, and then end him quickly. "Let's see how you handle that, Potter," he spat angrily as he narrowed his red eyes in disgust, as he watched his men being dismantled by his enemies. Break. Harry and Sirius became aware that they had been joined by others. They noticed the Weasleys and Remus assembled behind them, firing their own spells into the advancing Death Eaters, and they noticed both Robards and Moody to their right, following their own example of working in tandem with one another, doing so effectively. The other thing they noticed was that their own numbers were beginning to dwindle and reduce fairly rapidly. They were outnumbered considerably and knew their losses would be felt much more than Tom's. Harry growled and began firing off spells with more vigor, but was distracted by a frantic shouting coming from an aura to his left, who was pointing in the direction of the mountains. "Inferi," the man warned worriedly. Harry turned and saw the mass of pale corpses making their way towards them, and he released a breath of frustration. He sent off a Patronus and began fighting again, hoping that one of his contingency plans would come into effect quickly. "A Patronus?" Sirius asked confusedly. "You'll see," Harry answered simply, and began fighting once more. Sirius just shook his head and continued firing a salvo of spells into a group of Death Eaters to his left. It was only a short minute later that the auras and members of the Order were disturbed by the arrival of dozens of men and women in light blue robes, who immediately began helping them by attacking the Death Eaters, and inferi that were quickly closing the distance between them. "It's nice of you to join us, Jean," Harry greeted the head of the French DMLE. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Harry," the man responded, as he clapped the teen on the shoulder before sending a stream of fire into the inferi. "Damn Potter," Moody growled approvingly. "You know how to make the right friends," he praised as he fired of a killing curse towards the Death Eaters that were leading the dead towards them. Harry just nodded and continued his own efforts to prevent them from being overrun. Break. Lord Voldemort looked on with glee as his men started to gain the upper hand, as the aura numbers began reducing at a satisfactory pace. "Perhaps I won't even need to fight him," he mused happily. His joy quickly turned to shock and anger once more as the number of the auras was bolstered significantly by the arrival of 100 or so men and women in light blue robes. The Dark Lord growled angrily but allowed a cruel smirk to cross his distorted features as he witnessed the last of his men and followers heading towards the fray. "Not bad," he admitted grudgingly. "But not good enough," he added confidently as he focused once more on the fight, waiting for Potter to reveal his location just in case. Break. With the addition of the French auras, things started to look up as the progress made by the corpses in their advance were hindered greatly. The arrival of the French gave the English auroras a moment of respite, so they could take a breath and heal any injuries they had received. Their respite was short-lived, however, as several shouts rang out within their group at once. "Giants," a female voice sounded. "Trolls," another followed. "Dementors," a gruff male voice finished as each new enemy was identified and indicated by which way they were approaching. "Shit," Moody growled. A roar of pain and anguish sounded from where the giants were approaching. The noise rose above all other audible happenings in the village, and many stopped what they were doing as the chilling sound began. "Looks like one of them fell into one of your traps," Sirius said in explanation. "Looks like it worked then," Moody mumbled. "Traps?" Roberts questioned the trio. "We gouged a few trenches into the ground and filled them with spikes," Harry explained with a shrug. "And put a few curses on them before hiding them with illusion spells," Sirius explained further with a proud grin. Nice work, lads, Moody praised. Now can we get on with it? He asked, irritably, as another roar of anger could be heard. Sirius, you go with Gawain and deal with the giants. Lure them into the trenches if you can, Harry instructed. I'm not leaving you, Sirius responded adamantly. Harry sighed. Look what is heading this way, he pointed out. Dementors are not your strong point if you remember correctly, and those with the trolls is not a good mix for you, he returned, heatedly. Go on, lad, Moody encouraged him. I've got his back, he said promisingly. Sirius nodded reluctantly and pulled his godson into a hug. I'll be back as soon as possible, Sirius whispered and headed off quickly with the head of the Aurors to tackle the giants that were descending on them. Harry turned back towards the advancing enemy and shook his head knowingly. This is not going to go well, he stated to Moody. Aye, lad, the men are getting tired, he pointed out. And there are too many, he growled, as a large crowd of vampires and untransformed werewolves headed towards them. Fuck, Harry gritted out and pulled Moody forwards with him as he leveled his wand at the advancing inferi. Fiend! Fire! He roared and looked on as a chimera erupted from his wand and began reducing the corpses to ash. Moody nodded approvingly and followed suit, sending the Death Eaters controlling them scattering in several directions. They knew their efforts were in vain, however. They would soon be overrun by the trolls, vampires, werewolves, dementors, and the rest of the Death Eaters. All that was left was to fight until they could no longer. Harry felt a wave of anger overcome him as he felt his chance at vengeance and redemption slipping from his fingers the closer Tom's army got. He shook his head as he realized that the trolls leading the charge were only a dozen or so meters from them, and he braced himself for the fight of a lifetime. Pull back, a man behind them shouted, but both Moody and Harry ignored the advice. Neither man would retreat now. The trolls made it to around 20 feet away when several loud and indignant screeches could be heard coming from the direction of the forbidden forest. Harry frowned at the familiar sound, but his eyebrows quickly rose in recognition as he spotted a large collection of beasts flying towards them. Tristan, he whispered, knowingly. What? Moody asked, clearly on edge by the new arrivals. My griffins and the strolls, Harry pointed out gratefully as the mass of beasts collided with the trolls, vampires and trolls. A loud cheer erupted from within their ranks as they dispatched of the trolls in only a few moments and sent the werewolves and vampires retreating in panic at the sight of the unexpected cavalry. You have griffins? Moody asked Harry disbelievingly. Harry just nodded and grinned. Must be damn loyal to you, he observed, as he witnessed the creatures tearing the trolls limb from limb. They are, Harry replied in just above a whisper. He quickly fired a spell over Moody's shoulder as he caught a glimpse of blonde hair attempting to retreat. The mane screamed in pain as the curse collided with him and he fell to the ground. Oh, Lucy, I have been waiting for this. Harry spoke in a dangerous tone as he approached the downed man. Potter, Malfoy spat distastefully. The Dark Lord is looking forward to killing you, he added, but the fear he felt was evident in his voice. He can't be that excited, Harry shrugged. He's sending his arse-lickers in first to try and weaken me, he concluded thoughtfully. Malfoy just growled, but did nothing, and Harry wanted him to fight. He smirked at the idea that formed in his mind. Your ex-wife sends her regards, he goaded, and was pleased to see Malfoy stiffen at his words. She's with you? The blonde asked incredulously. She is family, Harry happily pointed out. Malfoy growled at the younger man but was saved from the need to curse him as Dolohov appeared and fired a curse towards the team that he batted aside casually. I don't know who you are, but you can't be worth shit if you're licking Tom's ass too, Harry said to the newcomer casually. Very cocky for a man surrounded, Potter, Dolohov replied as he indicated a few others, emerging all with singed robes. I think you will find, Dolohov, that he isn't the voice of Moody cut in, as he, Remus and Professor McGonagall entered and took a defensive stance around the teen. Mad-eye, Moody, Dolohov intoned casually. It's been a long time, he mused aloud. Aye, Moody agreed. When Caro there cursed me in the back while we were fighting, he spat angrily as he pointed to one of the other men. Doesn't he fuck his sister? Remus asked, causing Harry to splutter at the unusually crude language of the werewolf. Aye, that's what I heard. Moody chuckled gleefully as the man in question began shaking in rage. Fuck you, half-breed, the man spat as he fired a curse towards Remus. Moody immediately fired back and Harry sent several curses towards Malfoy as he tried to retreat once again. Remus ended up battling with the short and ugly female that was definitely related to Caro, and McGonagall began dueling with Dolohov. The fight on this front was coming to a conclusion. Harry just hoped that Sirius was faring as well as he. He saw that the Griffins and Thestrals were still battling the remaining Death Eaters, but noticed that the Dementors were now heading towards where the giants could still be seen. A very powerful explosion was heard from the direction they were heading in, and Harry just knew that he was needed there. He had a gut feeling, and his gut had never let him down yet. Sirius, he whispered worriedly as he looked upon Malfoy. He was torn between punishing the blonde and finding his godfather. Making his mind up quickly, he fired a string of curses at the man and knew he had landed a few at least, and that the man was not for this world much longer. He had to get to Sirius. That was what was most important to him now. He used his wand to levitate himself and took control of the spell wandlessly, something he had witnessed his grandfather do in the Pensieve many moons ago. He used his wand to fire of a powerful stream of wind and aimed it behind him, propelling him forward at great speed towards where he knew the man he sought would be. To those on the battlefield, it seemed as though Harry Potter was flying without a broom or any other magical aid, but to the teen himself, he knew that it was a combination of simple spells, but he did now that it certainly looked impressive. There were very few who could even levitate a feather wandlessly, let alone their own body. Break! Albus Dumbledore watched in awe as the Griffins and Thestrals arrived and made quick work of the trolls. He shook himself from his thoughts and immediately began defending the group he was a part of from the Dementors, along with Phileas, who as usual had been a phenomenon with his wand. The Weasleys were all surrounding young Percival, who had unfortunately fallen victim to a rather nasty curse that was causing the young man considerable pain. Albus was aware that his healing ability was rather poor and knew that his Patronus was needed to help keep the former guards of Azkaban at bay. He watched as the creatures began to head in the direction that the giants were still attacking from, and was about to follow when his eye was caught by a sight he certainly did not expect to see. Harry Potter was flying across the village, actually flying towards where the Dementors were heading. The headmaster shook his head again and decided that he would try to locate Minerva, who he had last seen with Remus Lupin. His attention was caught once more, this time by the sight of spellfire taking place in the vicinity to his left. On closer inspection, he could see Remus Lupin along with Alistair fighting a few more recognizable Death Eaters than those they had encountered so far. He looked again and blanched at what he saw. Minerva was fighting Antonin Dolohov, a formidable man with his wand, certainly one of the most skilled Death Eaters in Tom's ranks. The aged wizard charged towards the fight and cursed the anti-apparition wards that had been placed. He was only 30 feet away from the conflict when he was stopped in his tracks by what he saw. Dolohov fired a purple bolt from his wand and it caught the Transfiguration Professor flush in the chest. She fell soundlessly to the ground and did not move even an inch. Dumbledore paled. He was not aware of the curse he had seen, but he knew that it must be very unpleasant to bring Minerva down so quickly. He noted that Dolohov was laughing maniacally at his achievement and felt an influx of pure, unadulterated rage invade his body. He began to shake uncontrollably as he stalked towards the still laughing man and leveled his wand in his direction. "Oh, Dumbles wants to play, does he?" Dolohov sneered as he fired off the same purple spell that had taken down Professor McGonagall. Dumbledore sidestepped the spell nimbly and fired off a blasting curse with all his might at the man. Dolohov did not expect the leader of the light to fire such a curse and did not bother dodging, having expected nothing more than a stunner from the man, as was his reputation. He was shocked, however, when he did recognize the spell, but knew he did not have time to avoid it as it hurtled towards him with blistering speed. He hurriedly erected a shield in an attempt to dampen the power of the curse, but it simply was not enough. Antonin Dolohov disappeared in a spray of red mist as he was reduced to nothing more than tiny fragments of flesh and bone. Dumbledore balked at the effect his spell had had, and the remaining Death Eaters froze in fear. They were dispatched by the members of the order they were fighting, who quickly gathered around their leader as he made his way to the fallen woman. "Minerva?" he questioned desperately as he crouched beside her and attempted to gain some indication that she was alive. "She's gone," Albus Moody said after a moment of observing the woman. "There's nothing you can do," he explained, placing a hand on the distraught man's shoulder. "No," Dumbledore choked pleadingly. "Minerva," he begged as he took her hand and gave it an encouraging squeeze. No matter how much he pleaded and begged, his longtime friend was unresponsive. He knew that she was dead, but he could not accept it. He wouldn't accept it. He felt the first mournful tears escape his eyes as he clutched Minerva's hand, simply not being able to let go. He felt a sudden warm weight land on his shoulder and looked to see that his familiar had arrived. Fawkes began to sing a song in honor of the woman they had both become very fond of over the many decades they had shared together. Albus just listened to the song as he held the hand of the woman and allowed the tears to continue to fall freely. "Let's go," Moody ordered. "He will be okay," he assured Remus, who was also weeping at the loss of his former professor. The two were making their exit when they heard a cough sound from behind them. They turned to see a very sickly-looking Lucius Malfoy sprawled on the ground, attempting to hide himself from view. Moody approached him and chuckled darkly. "You're dying," he stated simply. "One of Potter's curses," he added with a grin. "That will be very unpleasant," he concluded, and removed the man's wand from his hand and snapped it in half. "Can't have you taking the easy way out, can we?" he finished and fired a bone breaker at each of the man's legs, eliciting a shrill scream for his effort. He gave Malfoy a final smirk before leading Lupin away. "He was already dead," he growled casually. Remus just shrugged and followed the man. The fighting on this side of the village had finished, so the pair headed towards where spellfire could be seen further in front of them. "Where's Harry?" Remus suddenly asked worriedly. "Saw the lad flying that way," Moody replied. "Flying?" Remus spluttered. Moody confirmed. "I've learnt to just take what he does in my stride," he explained. "The lad is full of surprises, always," he finished with a shake of his head. The pair began hurrying towards where they could see the fighting, but paused suddenly as a large wall of flame formed around where there had been spells flying only moments ago. They heard a series of loud screeches and saw the griffins that had attacked the trolls now attacking the giants, picking them apart with the help of spears and other lethal items being banished towards their foes. "Looks like the main event has started," Moody growled, pointing towards the fire. "Cursed fire," he grunted in explanation. Remus looked towards the flames and noticed that they were not normal in a color or appearance. They were mostly jet black and danced in a strangely enticing rhythm, not the way that regular flames were sporadic and unpredictable. "What do we do?" he asked the grizzled Auror, who was adjusting his wooden leg. "Let's head over," Moody instructed, pointing towards the area that the flames had appeared in. "They might need us," he shrugged. Remus nodded and again followed the man. He was keen to see for himself if Harry and Sirius were okay. "Break?" Sirius and Gawain headed away from Harry and Moody in the direction that the giants had appeared. They could see 4 of the beasts and knew that one of them had fallen into one of the traps that he and Harry had created the night before. "We should be able to lure 3 of them into the rest of the traps," Sirius explained. "That will leave only one we have to fight. We should be able to handle that," he added hopefully. Gawain just nodded in reply. He was not keen on the idea of fighting a giant, but felt much safer in the presence of Sirius, knowing that the man had experience battling them. They reached their destination without being hindered much. There were bodies here and there of both enemies and allies alike, but they ignored them for the time being. They had much more pressing issues to deal with. "Start conjuring weapons, swords and spears," Sirius instructed, to which Gawain immediately complied. The marauder began banishing the conjured items towards one of the behemoths in an effort to gain its attention, and it worked as intended. A giant of close to 25 feet in height began lumbering towards the pair clumsily, roaring in anger and swinging a tree. It had uprooted with the intention of pounding the duo into pulp. "Black!" Gawain called fearfully as the creature neared striking distance. Sirius ignored the man and continued goading the monster. Black! Gawain screamed as the trunk whistled through the air in front of them. The ground suddenly rumbled and the giant disappeared into a large pit. There was a moment of utter silence before the air was ripped with a guttural shriek of pain emitting from the pit in which the creature had fallen down. The screaming lasted only a moment and silence reigned in the pit once more as the giant perished. One more down, Sirius sighed as he released a long drawn-out breath. "You nearly gave me a fucking heart attack." Gawain responded weakly as he clutched his chest tightly. "I knew what I was doing," Sirius replied, though his voice was laced with uncertainty. "Come on, we have 2 more traps," he said as he began pulling the man towards their next location. They managed to dispose of one more giant in a similar fashion before things took a turn for the worse. "Dementors," Gawain muttered darkly as he felt the familiar cold and sense of dread set in. "Fiend fire," Sirius explained, pointing to the other side of the village where the flames could be seen. "They obviously don't like it very much," he added thoughtfully. "Expecto Patronum," both men cast in unison. Sirius's Grim and Gawain's Eagle Patronus began guarding their casters, waiting for the creatures they defended against to come nearer. They heard a series of screeches and saw a large amount of flying creatures diving into to attack the trolls they could still see in the distance. "Are they griffins?" Gawain asked, clearly in shock. Harry's Sirius answered with a grin. Gawain shook his head. "How the hell do you make friends with griffins?" he asked incredulously. "Harry has some kind of gift with animals," Sirius replied with a shrug. "I guess he won them over, they live on his property," he explained to the confused man. "Always full of surprises, that one," the Auror mused. "You have no idea," Sirius chuckled. "Break." The Dark Lord watched in fury as his inferi were reduced to ashes by the combined fiend fire spells. He knew that there were very few people that could cast it with the level of control he was witnessing. "Potter and Black," he growled angrily. His rage only increased as he saw the arrival of the Griffins and Thistrels. He watched in shock and concern as they tore through his ranks of trolls, vampires, and werewolves, as thought they were nothing. He had to admit that they were very impressive beasts. "You are surprising, Potter," he conceded bitterly. He was pulled from his observations as he caught a glimpse of silvery light glistening in his peripheral vision to his left. "Black," he gasped triumphantly as he made out the image of the Grim. He glanced at the other Patronus he could see and knew that Potter's wasn't an eagle. He was sure that it was a stag, as Pettigrew had pointed out helpfully. The Dark Lord grinned evilly. "You shouldn't have wandered off alone." "Black," he remarked happily as he made his way towards the area marked by the Patronuses. "Break." Sirius and Gawain awaited the approach of the creatures whose presence had flooded every one of their senses. They shivered from the cold that had seeped in and tried to make small talk to ignore the terrible sounds each were hearing within their own minds, as their worst memories replayed over and over again. Gawain had felt safer in the presence of the marauder as they dealt with the giants, but it was now certainly Sirius's turn to take comfort in the abilities of the other man. Sirius detested the Azkaban guards above all else. He had spent 12 years in their company and they affected him much worse than the average witch or wizard, something he was crudely aware of. One did not become immune to their effects the more they were exposed to them. In fact, a hypersensitivity to them was the outcome of prolonged time with them, and Sirius Black had had his share of time with the Dementors. "They're getting closer," Gawain muttered uncomfortably. Their Patronuses were clearly under the same impression as they charged towards the cloaked creatures as they came into view around 50 meters away from the duo, causing them to shiver more violently. Before Sirius could even attempt to focus on maintaining his spell, a loud explosion rang out as he was plowed into violently and found himself sprawled onto the ground under the weight of his companion. "What the fuck?" the marauder grumbled as he pushed the man off of him. His eyes grew wide as he caught sight of the Auror he had only just been speaking to. Gawain Roberts was dead. His entire back was simply missing. All that remained was a large cavity in his torso that once housed his organs. Sirius swallowed and looked at the man's face. There was no expression of pain or shock. It looked as impassive as ever. He then realized that the cold he was feeling had only increased as his and Gawaine's spells had failed, and the Dementors were drawing ever closer, but that was the least of his worries. Approaching him with a maniacal grin was Voldemort, his wand drawn and looking like the predator he had always been seen as. Sirius was relieved to find his wand was still in his hands, and he stood to confront the man that had murdered his best friend. "Mr. Black," Voldemort greeted him casually. "It seems as though your companion took the brunt of my spell," he said with a frown. "Shame," he added. "I'll just have to kill you another way," he finished with another grin. Sirius laughed at the Dark Lord and shook his head. "Fuck you, Tom," he spat angrily. "You might kill me, but Harry is coming for you," he warned. "You have no idea what he will do to you," he concluded with a grin of his own. The Dark Lord growled in anger and began firing spell after spell at the man that dared speak to him in such a way. Sirius dodged and batted away the spells as best he could, but he knew he was no match for the man. He was very powerful, perhaps more so than his godson, but the Animagus doubted that Harry had ever fired a spell at him with his full power. One thing he did notice, that Harry was certainly faster than Tom, considerably faster if this was all that he had to offer. A lull in the onslaught of spells came, and Sirius noticed that the Dark Lord was looking at him critically. "You have a lot of skill, Mr. Black," Voldemort praised sincerely. "If you would have joined me, you would be even better." Sirius chuckled darkly. "I wouldn't have joined you if you pissed whiskey and shit gold," he informed the man gleefully and fired of a blasting curse. Voldemort erected a shield and felt himself pushed back a couple of feet by the power. "Avada Kedavra," he roared. Before he could even consider conjuring a shield, Sirius felt himself launched through air and he landed with a heavy thud on the ground. He felt the coldness and despair of the Dementors recede as his vision returned to normal after his surprise banishment. Turning to look for what had sent him on his way, he spotted Harry landing on the ground in front of Voldemort, who was looking very surprised by the younger man's arrival. He could see the two talking, but could not hear what was being said as he had been sent a considerable distance. Harry suddenly waved his wand and a circle of black fire surrounded the two, blocking them from view. "Fuck, no!" Sirius cried desperately as he ran towards the flames and found himself bouncing off them time and time again. He attempted to fire a few spells and found they did nothing but bounce off also. All the marauder could do was wait and see what would happen. He swallowed deeply and watched the flames intently, his attention not wavering, not even for a fleeting second. "Break." Hermione came to as she felt herself being shaken violently. It took her a moment to remember what happened, and she groaned in pain as she felt the strain on her body while she attempted to sit. "Hermione," a voice called desperately, though it sounded partially muted. "Hermione," the voice sounded again a little more clearly this time as she was shaken again. "Neville?" she asked uncertainly, as her vision began to right itself, much to her relief. She saw the boy in front of her with congealed blood streaking across his face from a reasonably deep wound on the side of his head. "We have to help Hannah." The boy choked emotionally. "She's not breathing," he explained frantically as he pointed to a body laying several feet away from them. "What happened?" Hermione asked confusedly. "I don't know. A blasting curse, I think," he answered, distractedly as he pulled his fellow Gryffindor to the side of their downed friend. Hermione found her wand in her robes and began casting diagnostic charms on the girl. She swallowed deeply in shock at the results. "She's dead," she whispered, and choked back a sob. "No," Neville croaked disbelievingly. "She can't be, help her," he pleaded. "I can't, Neville, she's gone. Her lungs and heart are ruined," she explained sadly. Neville fell to his knees and sobbed uncontrollably as he clung to the girl and buried his face into her robes. "What the damn hell are you doing here?" a voice growled angrily, interrupting the pair. Hermione turned to see Mad-Eye Moody and Remus Lupin stalking towards them, looking furious. "We were trying to help," Hermione choked. "This isn't a place for kids, you morons." Moody scolded them as he pulled a distraught Neville to his feet. "Longbottom, is it?" the head of the DMLE asked. Neville just nodded mutely. "How the hell were you planning on helping?" Moody questioned. "Hannah and I have been practicing healing. Madame Pomfrey trained us," she explained. Come with us, Moody commanded with a frown. The castle is locked down and you may actually be able to help if Pomfrey taught you, he conceded reluctantly. Neville whimpered and refused to move. She's dead, Longbottom, Moody stated dispassionately. Don't let it be for nothing, boy. Make your trip out here count for something for her, he advised, pointing to the blonde. Neville sniffled and nodded. Remus put an arm around him as they continued on their way. What is that? Hermione asked, pointed to the black flames as she spotted them. We are going to find out, Moody responded. Stay close and if things go tits up, you run. Got it? He asked sternly. The two students nodded readily. They came upon the flames and Moody frowned at them uncertainly. Sirius, Remus called, as he spotted his friend, but the man did not respond. Sirius, he called again loudly and grabbed the man and shook him as he reached where he was stood, simply staring at the flames. Remus? Sirius asked weakly and pulled the man into a tight hug. What is that? The werewolf asked, pointing towards what he could see now was a circle of flames. Harry's in there with him, Harry conjured it. Sirius explained worriedly. Remus's eyes went wide. Shit, why would he do that? He asked. I don't know, Sirius answered honestly, but if you saw him before we came you would swear he'd lost it. I could actually feel his anger, Remus, he added, clearly concerned for his godson. Did you say Harry is in there? Hermione questioned the marauder. Sirius frowned at the girl but was stopped from questioning her when Remus cut in. They've already got it in the neck from Moody, Remus informed him. Good, Sirius intoned. What are these damned flames? Sirius, and where's Gawain? Moody broke in as he hobbled over. Gawain is dead, Sirius whispered. Shit, Moody sighed. He was a damn good man, he added genuinely. And the flames, he repeated. Harry's in there with him, Remus answered. Moody barked with laughter and pounded his wooden leg with his fist. Trap the prick then, he growled happily. Our resident Dark Lord has no idea what he's facing, he finished with a chuckle. Moody noticed the looks of shock he was receiving and shook his head irritably. From what we've seen, the lad is more than a match for the bastard, he explained confidently. I doubt we've seen everything he's capable, he mused aloud as he took a seat and waited. The small skirmishes had long since finished, and all that was left was the conclusion of what was occurring within the flames. After several minutes more and more people joined them, and the media and even members of the public began to arrive in the village after word of the battle had clearly spread. All eyes were on the flames. None could see in, but they knew what was happening. The wizarding world watched on tenterhooks and with bated breath for the conclusion of the day. They could only hope that Harry Potter would emerge victorious, particularly those in the crowd that knew the young man personally. Break. Harry propelled himself towards where he had heard the explosion as quickly as his magic would allow him. As he neared where he knew his godfather would be, he shook himself as he felt the presence of the Dementors growing stronger, but he persevered, knowing that he could fight the effects a little longer. He blanched when he came upon the man he was looking for. He was dueling Tom, and though he was doing a rather good job at avoiding the spells that were sent at him, Harry knew that Sirius would not last much longer, despite how good of a wizard and fighter he had become. The young man smiled as he watched his godfather fire a blasting curse at Voldemort, forcing the man to conjure a hastily shield. His pride in the man was short-lived, however, as he saw the telltale green jet of light, indicating that Tom had fired a killing curse. Thinking quickly, he sent a powerful banishing charm at Sirius, and breathed a sigh of relief as the curse missed him and impacted against a nearby building. Expecto Patronum, he muttered, sending the inbound Dementors scarpering as Drewella flew towards them. Harry noticed the look of surprise that Tom wore as he noticed him flying towards him. The shock was evidently enough to prevent the Dark Lord from firing any spells or curses at the airborne team. Harry took his opportunity and landed in front of the man. You've taken enough people from me, Tom? He growled angrily as he felt the same fury course through his body that he had felt that morning, causing his eyes to pulse eerily once again. Potter, Voldemort spat simply. You and your allies have fought amiably, but we both know you are no match for me, he added confidently. Harry grinned maniacally. I can smell the fear on you, Tom. Believe me, I am going to cause you more pain than you can imagine, he promised. I do not fear you, Potter, the Dark Lord denied angrily. He smirked as he absorbed the rest of what Harry had said. Dear Harry, you haven't turned dark, have you? He asked mockingly. No, Harry replied casually. But I doubt anyone would approve of what I am going to do to you. But let's keep that between us, shall we, Tom? You deserve a special kind of justice, after all, he finished with a feral grin. He waved his wand and conjured a circle of black flames around the duo, hiding them from view. The world around them fell dead silent. There was no screeching from the griffins or screams of pain from the injured and dying. The only thing that could be heard was the gentle crackling of the conjured flames. What is this? Voldemort asked angrily. Just something that will ensure our privacy, Harry answered casually. No more running, Tom, he added seriously. This ends now, he growled as he fired a particularly dark cutting curse that would cut into the bone and sear the flesh and muscle around it at the man who sidestepped it warily. Impressive, Riddle conceded. You must have dug quite deeply to find that one, he acknowledged with a nod. But not good enough, he roared as he fired a string of curses towards Harry. Harry recognized a blood-boiling curse, an entrail expulsion curse, and a heart-stopping hex. He dodged the first two and batted the other back towards Tom, who dodged it nimbly. Not impressed, Harry shrugged as he slashed his wand through the air quickly, launching a purple bolt in Tom's direction. He saw a look of surprise cross Tom's face before he quickly conjured a large silver dome around himself, which absorbed the spell, much to his relief. One of Antonin's favorites, Voldemort observed. A very dangerous spell to play with, Harry, he warned as he shot the same spell back at the teen who conjured the same shield he had just witnessed to prevent the curse from hitting him. Harry growled angrily and began firing curses at will towards his foe, who followed suit. The two men danced around, shooting an array of lethal hexes, jinxes and curses at one another, dodging, shielding and batting them away when necessary. The time for talking was well and truly over. For now, they pushed each other to the best of their abilities and soon found themselves in a stalemate, a fight between equals, as Tom expected from what the prophecy had stated. Each man was certainly impressed by the skill that each other was showing, though they both expected the fight of a lifetime from the other. Harry began shooting off some of the more obscure spells that he had been learning from his grandfather's collection, and was pleased to see a look of concern cross Tom's face, as he clearly did not recognize them. Tom dodged the spells he did not recognize. He may not know what they were, but he knew that they were intended to kill or maim. He could feel the power the younger man possessed, and began to worry at the unrecognizable spells that were coming at him thick and fast. He grew weary of the attritional fight he found himself in, and decided to fight with the curses that had not failed him yet. He began firing killing curses as quickly as he could. They were tiring, but he knew the fight would be over if only he could catch the nimble younger wizard. Harry began conjuring granite slabs and blocking the killing curses. He knew that Riddle was getting desperate if he was resorting to only firing them. He paused to fire a powerful bone breaker, only to realize that he had made a mistake by pausing in his movement. Crucio, the Dark Lord, roared triumphantly as he saw Potter pause to fire his spell. He wasn't particularly keen on prolonging the fight with the Cruciatus curse, but the incantation was much shorter and it would incapacitate the teen so he could be finished at will. Harry collapsed as sheer agony ignited throughout every nerve ending in his body, but was surprised to only feel it for a split second. He heard Tom scream in pain as his own curse impacted. It did not deter the Dark Lord, though. Without missing a beat, he fired off 2 cutting hexes in quick succession, catching the teen on the thigh, flush and glancing his face as he turned to avoid it. Harry hissed in pain as the curse struck his thigh and quickly turned his face as he spied another heading towards it. He felt it brush against his cheek, opening another wound, but breathed a sigh of relief when he realized it was only a flesh wound. He rolled backwards to his feet and grinned evilly when he saw that Tom's left arm had been mangled by his spell, rendering it useless. Harry was impressed by the pain threshold of the Dark Lord. That amount of damage would usually incapacitate someone. He grudgingly gave the man some respect for his determination. He quickly healed the cut on his leg, knowing that he was losing a considerable amount of blood from it. It wouldn't do to become weak due to blood loss. "You've fought well, Harry," Voldemort praised, pulling Harry from his observations of his injuries. "But surely you can see that we are evenly matched," he added with a mocking sigh. "The prophecy even said so," he pointed out. "But if you continue to fight, then we will both die, and you know as well as I do that I will be back," he finished smugly. Harry chuckled. "The prophecy said you would mark me as an equal. It doesn't mean that it would always be that way," he responded. He had listened to it a few days prior to the battle. He refused to take any chances when it came to riddle, even if he did despise the subject of divination. "And you are referring to your Horcruxes?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. "I admit that you did well locating most of them," Voldemort ground out, "but you didn't get them all," he continued with a smirk. "Ah, you mean your snake?" Harry returned with a smirk of his own and was both pleased and relieved by the jaw of the Dark Lord becoming agape in shock. "She is being dealt with as we speak," Harry informed him casually. "You lie," Tom spat furiously. "She is protected by my most trusted." "Bellatrix?" Harry questioned. "She definitely isn't your most loyal," he mused aloud. "What's wrong, Tom?" Scared, he finished mockingly. "You've already proven you can't beat me, Harry," Voldemort replied exasperatedly. "I've seen your best and it is lacking," he concluded. Harry smirked dangerously. "You've seen nothing yet, Tom," he replied with a dangerous grin as he drew his second wand. Voldemort's eyes grew wide with shock and concern. He had heard of those that could use 2 wands, but it took a lot of practice, and he had never encountered one as powerful as Potter that had the ability to do it. He himself had never bothered after Dumbledore had refused to give him another feather from his phoenix for a second wand. He had tried several others, but none were as good as his own, so he abandoned it knowing that it was a very rare skill indeed, and it was unlikely that any who could use 2 wands would be a threat to him. Now he wasn't so sure as he watched Potter twirling both wands equally well in both hands. The Dark Lord swallowed deeply and braced himself. He knew that it was more tiring to use 2 wands in a fight, but he had already been struggling thus far against the younger man and he himself was feeling fatigued by his exertions. "I need to allow him to tire himself out," he thought desperately. He managed to erect his golden mage shield in the nick of time, and the various curses Potter fired at him reverberated against it, pushing him back violently against the wall of flames that he simply bounced off. Harry gritted his teeth firmly and braced himself as he began hurling rapid and powerful bludgeoners, bone breakers, and blasting curses from each wand in a dangerous rhythm at the shielding, in an effort to break it. His efforts were rewarded after a few moments as he began to see it flicker and weaken under the strain of his onslaught. The Dark Lord dug as deeply as he ever had into his magic, but knew that it would not be enough. He felt himself growing weaker and caught sight of the triumphant smile the boy wore as his shield turned translucent as it began to fail him. He felt the panic rise within him and threw himself to the ground in a final bid of desperation, causing his shield to collapse. Although he had thrown himself as clear as possible from the spells of the path, it wasn't enough. No sooner had he landed that he felt the first curse's impact against him, and his body erupted into agony. The spells stopped and he found himself shaking uncontrollably as the adrenaline and endorphins attempted to stave off the pain he was experiencing. He took stock of his body and knew immediately that many of his bones were broken. He simply could not move. He saw that his wand arm was nothing but a useless lump of flesh and crushed bone. His wand hung limply in his hand, and no matter how much he willed the appendage to move, it wouldn't. He caught sight of his leg and realized that it was several feet from his body, removed by a blasting curse, though it was probably the least amount of pain he was feeling. He knew he was defeated and he only hoped that Potter was bluffing about the fate of his beloved familiar. Harry stepped towards the downed body of the Dark Lord cautiously. He could see that he had been mangled and even partially dismembered, but he knew that the man was still dangerous. He saw that he was still in possession of his wand, though, by the state of his arm, it was unlikely that he would be able to use it. He summoned and pocketed it with a shudder, as thoughts of the amount of murder and torture it had been used for played around in his mind. He shook his head from the disturbing images and approached the pitiful sight before him. "You fucked up when you attacked my family," he stated darkly. "You really shouldn't have come for me, Tom," he added. "Now you will suffer for what you put me through. All I wanted was a normal life. But you couldn't just allow it, could you?" He spat bitterly. Riddle said nothing but stared at him with complete hatred in his eyes. "I said to you, the night in the graveyard, that one day you will be on the other end of the wand that will decide your fate. Do you remember?" Harry asked angrily. Still Tom said nothing. "I also remember saying that I hope that they show you the same mercy you have shown all of those you tortured and murdered," he continued. "I'm glad it's me that's here," he added. "Now you will suffer, Tom. The next few minutes are going to be very unpleasant for you," he concluded, as he began twirling his wand in an intricate pattern while mumbling. After a moment, Tom felt his whole body erupt in a type of pain he had never even comprehended could exist. It felt as though his insides were on fire, yet there were no flames. It felt as though he was being stabbed, yet there was no blades entering or exiting his body, and it felt like his skin was being stripped away from him in chunks, but it remained on him. He held on as long as he could, but began screaming as the pain became worse the longer the curse was coursing through him. "You said once that we were similar." Harry began speaking again when he knew the curse was doing its work. "You were right," he admitted reluctantly. "Both orphans, both raised in shitholes by bastards, and both having Hogwarts as our first home," he reeled off as he paced. "But that is as far as it goes," he continued after a moment. "I wouldn't kill an innocent person and I wouldn't torture someone for fun," he explained. "This," he said, indicating to the Dark Lord himself, "is justice. You reap what you sow, Tom, and you deserve every single moment of this, and more," he spat angrily. "But I am nothing like you," he finished, flicking his wand towards the throat of Voldemort, and severing the head away from the body. He placed his second wand back in its leg holster. He didn't want the world knowing what he was capable of after all, and burnt the remains of Tom's body minus the head, which he picked up with a grimace and walked towards the black flame wall to begin undoing the spell. If Bellatrix had been successful, then the war was finally over and Harry Potter could finally have the peace he had sought for so long. Break. Bellatrix, Black, had been waiting nervously for an inordinate amount of time for some kind of signal on what she should do. She did not want to simply just kill the snake on the chance that the Dark Lord was successful. He would simply kill her if things did not go as planned, and he returned to find that she had destroyed what she had been tasked to guard. The woman was not ashamed to admit that she was terrified. The snake watched her as she paced backwards and forwards from one side of the room to the other. The task itself was not particularly difficult, but she was very aware that it was the most important one that had been set for her in her life by both factions of the war. She could just as easily carry out the instructions the Dark Lord had given her, but she knew that her life would be forfeited for a fact. If she sided with Potter, then he would be true to his word and ensure that she would get a cell without dementors lurking in the corridor and with any luck some real food. She stopped her pacing suddenly as the snake began thrashing violently on the floor. She tentatively drew the dagger she had liberated from the Black Vault many years before and made her way slowly to the flailing creature. She watched in fascination as he threw itself to and fro in obvious pain and discomfort. She readied herself and launched into her attack. She drove the dagger with all her might into the snake's head, eliciting a screech of pain from the beast and more violent thrashing that sent the woman flying and crashing into the wall. After catching her bearings, she saw a deep black, oily substance leaking from the wound she had inflicted while the snake continued to scream in agony, but the animal was not finished yet. Once the oily substance had stopped flowing, the snake turned towards her and struck, sinking its venomous fangs into her shoulder repeatedly. Bellatrix fought back as best she could by stabbing the reptile time and time again with the dagger, and just when she thought she had nothing left, the creature fell limp. Bellatrix was in a very bad way. She had several puncture wounds spread about her body and she was already feeling weak from the effects of the toxins. She began to breathe heavily and knew she needed help. She quickly activated the portkey that would take her to Potter and hoped that he was in a position where he could save her. She wasn't ready to die yet, Not when life was about to get much easier for her. Break. The crowd gathered in Hogsmeade had been watching the odd black fire mostly in an anticipatory silence that was only broken by the clicking of cameras from the journalists and the occasional speculative whisper by those predicting the outcome of the fight taking place. Many were torn between disappointment and relief that were not having to witness the event which they knew would be nothing short of brutal and ferocious, thought they knew it would be an incredible display of magic. Sirius, Moody and Remus had been joined by the Weasleys, Tonks and the remaining members of the Order. Percy had sadly perished from his wounds despite the effort his family had made to save him, though the redhead had died with a smile on his face as he had been surrounded by his father and most of his brothers. His final words had been spent declaring his intentions to watch over his mother and sister for them until they would all be untied together again. Tonks was rather subdued as Kingsley hadn't made it, but had prevented many more lives being lost as he had single-handedly fought and defeated Jugson, Selwyn and McNair after they had tried to ambush her group as they were fighting off the Dementors and the Trolls. He had been gravely injured but managed to finish off the trio of men despite this. She certainly would never forget the dark-skinned man that had taken her under his wing on her first day in the academy. Albus Dumbledore made his way through the crowd to those he had led, his expression nothing short of heartbroken. He had prepared Minerva's body in a way he knew she would approve, and had transport her into her private quarters so that he could bury his friend later to her requests. He wanted nothing more than to be alone, but he had to see this through to the end and ensure that Tom was killed. If Harry hadn't succeeded in his efforts, then he prayed that Tom had been weakened enough for himself or someone else to finish him. Probably Sirius, he mused, spying the man who already had his wand in hand. He joined his friends but said nothing. He simply watched and waited along with them. He had already deduced that Tom and Harry were within the flames and that there was nothing else he could do. Sirius gasped as the flames began to flicker and fade. They suddenly collapsed, leaving only a thick cloud of smoke in their wake, and he swallowed deeply as he raised his wand, followed by Moody, Dumbledore and Remus. What they saw emerge left them all feeling relieved and nauseous. Harry Potter limped out of the smog covered completely in both fresh and congealed blood. His glowing green eyes stood out above it all. The young man looked completely sinister as he clutched the head of Lord Voldemort under his arm. Harry, Sirius choked as he stepped forward to greet his victorious godson. He only made it a couple of paces, however, when an enormous golden griffin landed in front of him and screeched threateningly. The beast was joined by a thustral that simply glared dangerously at the crowd, who all stepped back from the threat of the beasts. Harry stepped in front of his friends and deposited the head to the ground, quickly pulling both the griffin and the stroll into a hug as best he could. "You guys were amazing," he whispered. "Why don't you head home and I will see you there," he suggested. The griffin screeched gently and continued to eye the crowd and nodded sharply in their direction, causing Harry to chuckle. "I'll be fine, I promise," he said softly in an attempt to placate the irritable creature. The griffin screeched again and rubbed his head against the teen's face affectionately before screeching loudly one final time, causing the rest of his group and the thestrals that had accompanied them to take flight and make their way back to Potter Manor. The gathered witches and wizards watched in awe as the young man spoke with the animals. None had ever seen a griffin before and had only heard that they were exceedingly dangerous. Harry turned to face his godfather, who pulled him into a hug and cried into his shoulder, clinging to the young man. Harry wrapped his arms around the man and shook his head amusedly. "You do realize there are cameras," he whispered. "Don't care?" Sirius mumbled. He eventually extracted himself away from his godson and looked him over critically. "Are you hurt?" he asked worriedly. "I'm fine," Harry assured the man. He felt a heavy hand clap him on the shoulder and turned to see Moody grinning at him. "Got him then?" he growled as he nudged the head with his foot. Harry just nodded. "Good lad," Moody praised. "What are you all standing there gawping for?" he questioned the crowd angrily. "We have a hell of a mess to clean up and you've all just been drafted," he added with a smirk that seemed to snap the crowd out of their awestruck state. "Lord Potter," a voice called, and Harry turned towards it to find himself faced with a dozen journalists, clearly waiting for a story. He just raised an eyebrow at the familiar sight of Rita Skeeter. "What happened in there?" she asked, with a predatory grin. "What happened in there is between myself and Tom Riddle. You certainly will get no explanation from me," he answered coldly. "All that matters is that he is dead and he will not be coming back this time. That is all you need to know," he finished sternly. "The wizarding world has a right to know." Skeeter tried again, receiving several nods from her colleagues. "And I have the right to some peace," Harry ground out. "I will not be answering questions about this," he added, shaking his head. "You will respect my wishes," he demanded. "Did you use dark magic to defeat him?" Rita pushed a little further. "Would you like to find out?" Harry growled angrily at the woman, who blanched as she saw him fingering his wand. "That is enough," the voice of Amelia Bones cut in furiously. "You will all leave Lord Potter alone," she commanded. "He has the right to privacy, as he pointed out, and he will have it." "Thank you, Madame Bones," Harry said gratefully. "Now I believe Alastair Moody requires help," she addressed the crowd. "It is now time for us to pull together and help one another out. Let's get to it," she instructed with a clap of her hands. Those in attendance grumbled but obliged and began making their way to be given a job to do. Harry sighed and began making his way to Dumbledore along with Sirius and Remus when a heavily bloodied body landed in front of him. "Shit, Bellatrix!" Harry exclaimed in recognition as he bent down to check on the state of the woman. "I need a healer," he called desperately. "All the healers are busy," Remus said in disbelief, seeing Harry attending to Bellatrix Lestrange. "Time to shine." Granger, Moody growled as he pushed the girl forward. Hermione swallowed and made her way over to her friend and the deranged woman. She began casting diagnostic charms while giving the woman a confused look. "She's poisoned and lost too much blood. Blood replenishers won't be enough," she sighed. "Fuck," Harry growled. "I got her, Potter," Bellatrix said weakly. "She's dead." "Then you did good," Harry praised. "There may be a way to save her," Hermione piped up uncertainly. "Then do it," Harry commanded. "It's risky," Hermione explained. "We need 2 people who share her blood. 1 won't be enough. They would die from the blood loss," she added, shaking her head. "Sirius and I can do it," Harry responded quickly. "We both have black blood." Hermione sighed and began conjuring tubes and some pumping equipment. "Blood transfusion. But I don't know how it will work with magical blood," she warned. "Looks like we will find out," Harry sighed as he rolled up his sleeve. Sirius followed his lead, and Hermione began setting up the equipment. She placed the needles into each of their veins and began the process. "You better have a good explanation for this, Potter," Moody stated with a glare. "If it wasn't for her, then this wouldn't be over," he answered simply. "Your informant?" Moody questioned with a frown. Harry nodded. "Damn," Moody growled. "I won't question it," he added. "You've proven that I can trust you, lad. I'll take your word for it," he concluded, showing some confidence in the team. "Thank you," Harry replied sincerely. "She will be coming into custody, though," the head of the DMLE warned. "She already knows that," Harry answered. Lestrange, Neville spat angrily as he drew his wand and aimed it at the woman. "I wouldn't do that, Neville," Harry warned seriously. "She's the reason I have no parents," the boy gritted out. "If you want your revenge, then you can challenge her to a duel, but you won't attack her when she can't defend herself," Harry responded with a glare. "If you try, then it is my duty as her head of house to defend her. Don't make me do that, Neville. She will pay for her crimes," he promised. Neville was clearly torn, but after considering his options for a moment, he placed his wand back in his pocket. He certainly did not want to fight Harry, and he knew that his friend must have a reason to be keeping her alive. "She's starting to stabilize," Hermione announced, surprised. "It's working," she added disbelievingly. "She will still need to go to St. Mungo's, though." Harry nodded and felt a wave of relief wash over him. "I hope you appreciate this, Arcturus," he thought as he shook his head. "Okay, she's ready to be taken now," Hermione explained as she finished sealing the last of the puncture marks. "I've done everything I can." "Ever the genius, Hermione," Harry said with a smile as he pulled her friend into a hug. "We all mistakes, Harry," Hermione replied sadly, thinking of her Hufflepuff friend that had been killed. "But we learn from them, Harry," returned seriously, to which Hermione nodded. "Tonks," Harry called. The metamorph stepped forward and eyed her aunt warily. "Take her to St. Mungo's and stay with her. I will explain everything later," he promised. Tonks looked towards Moody, who nodded. "Aye, lass, do as he says," her boss instructed. Tonks took hold of her aunt's hand and portkeyed away. Harry breathed another sigh of relief. "Who did we lose?" he asked worriedly. "Percy," Charlie answered with a choke. "I'm sorry," Harry intoned sincerely. The Weasleys had now lost 3 members of their family to this conflict. Gawain, Sirius cut in. "Shit," Harry grumbled, as he pulled his hand through his hair. Over the past few months he had grown to both like and respect the head aura. He had a very dry sense of humor and was very gifted with his wand. He would certainly miss the man. Minerva Dumbledore sighed sadly. Harry felt a lump form in his throat at the last name. Professor McGonagall had always had his respect. Although she was a stern and fearsome woman, there was always a warmth around the Transfiguration Professor. Before Harry could express his sorrow, Dumbledore spoke again. "How about we go and get cleaned up?" he suggested. "I'm sure there is a certain young lady waiting to see you," he added to Harry. "Daphne," Harry whispered in realization and nodded to the headmaster, who began leading the way, followed by the teen and the rest of the order. "You may want to clean yourself up a little, pup," Sirius advised. "You look completely deranged with all that blood on you." Harry began removing as much from his skin as he possibly could. He knew it wouldn't come out of the very torn clothes he was wearing, so left them as they were. He would send for Elgar to bring him some when he got the chance. Break. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was one of complete tension, felt by everyone assembled in the room. They had listened intently to the explosions they could hear from within the castle, along with the occasional ear-splitting screams that permeated throughout the room. But the sounds of battle had finished quite some time ago, and now the occupants of Hogwarts were simply waiting for word on the outcome. Several voices suddenly became audible from outside the hall, and the students and staff alike stiffened, some drawing their wands ready to defend themselves. The door opened to reveal a very tired-looking Albus Dumbledore, and a sigh of relief escaped many at the sight of the man. The headmaster was followed by a limping and blood-clad Harry Potter, his green eyes glowing in their usual fashion. Harry had barely crossed the threshold when he heard his name shouted, and a blonde blur ploughed into him and began crying into his chest in relief and happiness. "I'm okay," Harry assured Daphne as he wrapped his arms around her and held her to him. Sirius followed his godson into the room and was accosted in a similar fashion. "Dad," Natalie cried as she fell into him. Sirius immediately bent down and hugged the girl, fighting back the tears that were forming in his eyes. This was the first time she had called him that, and it filled him with a tingling sensation. "Not princess this time, then?" he asked with a watery laugh. Natalie just shook her head firmly and held the man tighter. "Albus?" Professor Sprout questioned worriedly. Dumbledore shook his head and made his way to the podium in front of the staff table. He looked around and sighed before he addressed the room. "Lord Voldemort has been defeated," he informed them. A loud cheer erupted within the room, but Dumbledore held up his hands to gain their attention once more. "This war has been costly," he began again. "We lost many good men and women today, and one student," he explained sadly. "Let this be a lesson to you all, that war is neither fun nor glorious," he continued firmly. "Which student did we lose?" Slughorn asked with a swallow. "Hannah Abbott," Dumbledore answered with a sigh. Susan Bones and many of her housemates began to sob at the news. "Where is Minerva?" Sprout questioned. Dumbledore choked back his emotion. He would have time to mourn later. "She didn't make it," Flitwick cut in, seeing that the headmaster was having a difficult moment and could not answer. "Oh no," Sprout gasped, covering her hand with her mouth. Dumbledore released a deep breath before he addressed the room again. "We largely have Harry Potter and Sirius Black to thank for today's victory," he explained with a nod towards the duo. "Not only were they both vital personally in battle, but they helped prepare our forces to the best of their ability with the help of Alistair Moody and Gawain Robards, who sadly did not survive today," he said gravely. "Had these men not prepared and fought so diligently, we would certainly have lost more people and perhaps even lost the war," he added genuinely. I will of course keep you all updated with any relevant information, he finished, as he stepped away and exited the hall. Harry watched the man leave and saw the lost expression he wore. I'll be back soon, he promised Daphne, who nodded her understanding. Sirius made to follow also, but Harry stopped him with a shake of his head. Take Natalie and let your wife know you're okay. We can catch up later, he said to the man who nodded, and took his daughter as he left the castle. Harry left the hall to find the headmaster. Most seemed content to leave the man to his own devices, but Harry wasn't. He wanted to be there for the man if he needed him in any way. To many, Albus Dumbledore was untouchable and unshakable. Harry, however, had seen the vulnerability of the man and saw him simply as a human being, a unique one of course, but human nonetheless. Break. Sirius arrived home along with Natalie to find his wife in tears and distraught in the kitchen. As the pair entered, Marlene stood from the chair she was sat in and just stared at her husband, as though she was trying to decide if he was really there or not. You made it, she whimpered as a fresh stream of tears made their way down her cheeks. I did? Sirius choked with a nod. It's over, he sobbed as he pulled his wife and daughter into his arms and held them, simply savoring the moment. Break? Harry made his way through the castle, heading for the headmaster's office. He reached the stone gargoyle and sighed as he realized he didn't know the password. Could you just let me pass? He asked the statue that just remained idle. Young man, a voice called. Harry turned to see a portrait looking at him intently. You will find the headmaster in the deputy's office, the painting informed him. Thank you, Harry replied gratefully, and made his way to McGonagall's office, somewhere he used to fear being summoned to. He came upon the room to find Dumbledore stood in the middle of it and simply staring around. Harry placed a comforting hand on the man's shoulder to get his attention. Dumbledore jumped at the contact bus, visibly relaxed when he caught sight of the teen. Should you not be celebrating, Harry? He asked, with a light frown.